Hello, everyone, and welcome to MFA Writers. My name is Brie Gamaz, and I'm your co-producer. I'm new here, but you can find me in the inbox, on social, and occasionally on the pod. So please don't be shy. We would love to hear from you. Send us a DM, tag us, or comment on our latest posts on Instagram and Twitter, or email us at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to be a guest on our show or know someone who would be a great fit, you can apply at mfawriters.com. And while you're there, if you love the podcast and would like to support us, you can buy us a coffee or donate directly at buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Last but not least, don't forget one of the greatest contributions of all, which is rating and reviewing the podcast on your podcast player of choice. Jared has another great episode for you today. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Brad Hoge. Brad is a poet in his second year of San Francisco State University's MFA in Creative Writing. He is the author of 4 chapbooks and was the managing editor for Dark Matter Journal. His poetry and photography can be found in numerous journals, including the California Literary Review and several anthologies from the California Writers Club, including 2024's Best of the Best. Much of his poetry uses metaphors from the sciences, and in addition to being a grad student, he also teaches middle school English. Today, Brad has brought 2 poems to read for us.
Thank you. We'll start with The Eye of God. Astronauts spacewalking from Gemini observed the Eye of the Sahara, thinking it might be the Eye of Horus. Molten bubble rising, crust a blooming rose, sediment providing fertile soil for Berber and Darfur farmers, until drought pushed them south. The Eye has witnessed many migrations of Niger-Congo peoples, Arab conquest, French colonization, its gaze remaining steady throughout drought-driven conflicts, slave trade, political upheavals. And it will continue its stoic watching as climate change expands the Sahara, overwhelming the Sahel, driving refugees across Mauritania into malnourishment, starvation, disease, indifferent to the suffering, as if the unblinking eye of God. The other one I'm going to read is a difficult one to read. It includes a lot of mathematical symbols, so I will translate those as I read and pause a little bit so that maybe it'd be a little obvious where those symbols are. And the title is Construct, parentheses, I, close parentheses, vism, constructivism. The integral of a life from beginning to end, continuous present, equals the sum. Past and future exist in the present tense, belongs to. There are many P's in PBL, equals the function of exploration, is the courage to err. There exists such that, see how the lichen traces the swirling bark, equals mildew is nature's verdigris. Greater than or equal to, I am a misanthropic old man, null set. I really can't connect to Gen Z's travails, because then is too distant. Therefore, I can no longer distill any wisdom to offer for my experiences in a quality that is true no matter the values. Bark gnarling and writhing into mesmerizing patterns is approximately equal to can childhood memories be considered more? The boundary of topological subspace. The brain is the only place learning can happen, equals I can't put something into your head. Delta, I can only guide you, equals problem, equals being completely present, union of sets, paper bark peeling as I walk the dog, greater than or equal to the fantasy football draft starts in 1 hour, less than or equal to, I always carry a hand lens in case I encounter rock outcroppings. There exists such that, kaleidoscope of ages, there exists such that, Dewey is to Stein as Stein is to Dewey, intersecting sets. Project equals, can current events or landscapes be considered more? Because place is proportional to having been a scientist, the boundary of topological space. I am hyper-aware of misconceptions because climate change denial equals phenomena, equals watching clouds fill Salinas Valley from Gallivan, the boundary of topological space. As an educator, approximately, I am always hyper-aware of misconceptions of constructivism, Dewey, not Vygotsky, equals serious play, not equal to serious games, less than or equal to game-based learning, equals Vygotsky, equals I like teaching middle school, divergence. Fifth grade was when the pain and embarrassment started, from Celiac. The function of sixth grade, I learned to hide it, equals projecting an indeterminate state, approximately equal to landscapes in fog, equals rolling waterfall, belongs to the set. Phenomena equals the ocean gets deeper the higher you climb. Greater than or equal to words are malleable objects. Wittgenstein, I think, is approximately equal to oceans shattered and crumpled into hills, because Stein, as in Gloria, as in Gaynor, as in dive into the deep end, boundary of topological space. I am constantly distracted by this tendency, the function of I do not listen well to poets reading their work, because I drift off with inspired thoughts, equals waking minutes later, null set, realizing I've missed much of the poem, equals I am always chagrined by this tendency. There exists such that writing my own poems in my head equals composing, equals living, is approximately composing one's life. Careful observation equals a skill common to children, but often lost to adults, approximately equal to moss marking trees, like telescoping stratigraphy, equals confronting puzzles, equals construct I-vism, because trees harbor their own ghosts, an equality that is true no matter the values.
Brad, that was great. Thank you so much for reading those for us, and thanks for being here.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, when I first saw that second poem written out, I thought, how is he going to read this on the show? So, so thank you for translating it from the mathematical
Right.
symbols into something that could be read. So, as listeners can probably tell, you have like this interesting style to your poetry, and the subject matter is really interesting too. And a lot of it draws from your experience in the natural sciences and in mathematics. So, let's talk about that experience. Before becoming a graduate student in creative writing, what were you up to?
uh, well, it's funny because every time I catch myself, I'm in graduate school, obviously, but I always refer to my PhD as when I was in graduate school. And that goes back to when a lot of this stuff really started, at least becoming serious. I wrote in college a little bit, but I started getting more serious about it in graduate school. I was in ecology and evolutionary biology department. I got a PhD in ecology of wetlands, wetland ecology. One of the professors there, though, on my committee was in a subcommittee of the original IPCC, International Panel for Climate Change. So I was well schooled on climate change coming out of graduate school, and that was in 1994. So ever since then, I've been somewhat up against climate denial, science denial is a big part of my career. Right after grad school, I stayed home with my kids for 9 years. So when I went back to work, I found a position as a science educator more so than as an ecologist, though it was in a natural science department. That's where I really started writing a lot as well, particularly relative to my experience as an at-home father and with my children. So my first book, Nebular Hypotheses, is focused on those experiences. My wife is an attorney, and the reason I followed that path was to allow her to finish law school first. So her path brought us to Houston, Texas, and that's where I got my PhD at Rice University. Ended up with a master's in education from Texas A&M as well in the oceanography department. There's a lot of that experience, all of those experiences in the sciences that inform as I write, the metaphor that I think of or the illusions that I think of that are most relevant to what I'm trying to say are from science, scientific language, scientific terms, but mostly concepts. I lean back on evolutionary psychology quite a bit because it's talking about our human nature that way. So I think that's maybe a rambling way of answering your question. See if you can parse that out.
I mean, clearly, like the natural sciences has been a huge part of your life. So how could it not be a big part of your poetry as well? So you were talking about how you really started writing when you were in that PhD program, the first time you were a graduate student.
That's right.
So when you were writing then, was it also poetry? Has it always been poetry for you?
Yeah, it started. I mean, I did try to write some stories, some short stories, and I even wrote a really bad novel. But what I realized from those experiences was that I was mostly interested in the premise, and I didn't have the patience for characters and really developing a lot of the setting. And I was writing poetry too, but I was trying to do both. And I realized the poetry really served me better because I could write about ideas. I could write about a philosophical idea or an observation of nature that I've made and how that impacts me. And that fit my time schedule for another thing, being in graduate school and not really having a lot of time to sit down and write a long piece. And it serves the way I think. It's just, again, fragmented. It's broken up into time segments that are available for poetry, but really hard to organize anything else. And I've, of course, come to really love poetry as not just my easiest outlet, but really my most creative outlet.
Well, I think you're not alone. I think pretty much everyone on this show, including the host, has a bad first novel in a drawer somewhere. So, so
Yeah,
don't feel
yeah.
bad about that. What do you think it is about poetry that helps you think about the natural sciences and think about some of these themes that you're exploring?
Yeah, like I said, it's hard to really separate that from who I am. So I take who I am with me. I do a lot of hiking. And when I'm hiking, I see a lot of like amazing redwood trees, and the bark is amazing. And I'll take close up pictures of the bark and of what's called the bole, which is the bottom part of the tree where it's kind of bubbles out over the ground in some cases, which is really, really amazing. So I come back to those pictures a lot and use that as inspiration. But I also stop along the way quite often and just jot down an idea. Everything I do, all of my writing starts in my journals. I always have a writing journal with me. I have one in my backpack now that I take to SFSU. I have one in the pocket of my coat when it's colder. I have one in the car and so on. Um, so just writing what I'm seeing in the journal, but not in a descriptive sense, but almost in how it's impacting me. I mean, that the science comes into the theme that is evoked from those trees or rocks. Again, my background includes geology as well as ecology and oceanography. So it's a pretty broad experience in the sciences. So I've written a lot about, seeing the ocean in rocks and things like that. And it's just something that as I'm driving by perhaps or walking by, it kind of hits me with a sense of awe. And I'm like, wow, this is really something. I should write that down. Uh, and usually it's never done right the first time you write it down. I tend to write in couplets just because that actually helps my flow and the enjambments that kind of naturally happen while I'm taking notes tell me something about what I'm trying to say. It's not always where you end up, but that's the process.
Going into that process a little bit more, you say that you have this notebook with you, you're writing down things as they occur to you as you're out hiking around. And then when you go to sit down and work on a poem, are you looking through that notebook and seeing what jumps out at you? Or do you already know, like, one of those things you wrote down is staying with you and you know you're going to write that poem?
Well, there's certainly some that are immediate where I want to get to work on them right away, and I know I want to craft them into something. But there's also, particularly recently, where I flip through them again and go back and find things I wrote down that I didn't think were that significant, but they fit perfectly into a new poem that I'm writing or something else. So I mine my journals all the time for ideas that I've written down over the years. But really, in the last 2 years, I've been much more active in both of these types of the ways that I develop a poem. Some are immediate. Some do write themselves almost immediately the first time I write them down. Usually I go back and rethink and rewrite, but it's the pieces that come together in what I'm writing right now. The style I'm writing now is more again, fractured, kind of like that second poem that I read, where it's really like three or four trains of thought kind of woven together.
I'm always interested in the ways that like temporal distance affects our writing. So I'm curious what it's like for you, if it's interesting or inspiring to go back through those journals and look at things you wrote down months or years before and think, oh, yeah, I remember that thing that I thought was interesting. Like, what is that like? Has that been fun for you?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun because I've been doing this for a long time, so I've got pretty embedded folders in my laptop or in my computer, and I have some that I say, okay, still need work, and I put them in a folder, or I have another one where I think it's just not very good, or it's a fragment, or it's something else, and so I put them in these folders away from kind of the ones that I'm working on right at the moment, because there's usually I don't want to spend more than about maybe 3 to 4 or 5 poems at a time that I'm really processing and trying to craft. And so those go back decades, which is I'm always surprised when I think about my life and like, oh yeah, I did that, and then I realize it was 30 years ago. Um, so those have been really interesting, going back into those embedded files and finding things I wrote down that I just kind of rejected, and now I'm seeing at least a kernel of something there, a kernel of wisdom, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm sure there are lots of writers who read things they wrote years before and think, oh, I don't like that. I can't believe I wrote that. But it's
Yeah,
the exact opposite thing can happen too, where you write something down and think in the moment, oh, this is nothing. This is no good. And then you return to it years later and you're like, oh, now I see what's there?
yeah. Well, it's easier too for me to mine the files than it is to go back into the shelf and pull off the journals that those ideas are recorded in.
Right.
And it'd be like there's no index of that like there is on the laptop. I try not to take too long to get what I've written down into a document on my laptop. So when I'm going back for things, that's where I'm looking.
Okay, so this science background of yours, it clearly plays into the themes of your poetry a lot. I'm curious to know if you think it also plays into your process. Do you find that scientific mind of yours, do you think that it is affecting the process of writing a poem?
Well, I certainly think when I think about myself as a scientist, I'm not very detailed. I'm much more conceptual and like big ideas. So, in that sense, yes, being able to conceptualize something and to think of it, there's a cause and effect that you're looking for, but there's also the next question. As a scientist, you're really always looking for what's the next question, what's the next problem that needs to be solved, and that's kind of where my poetry goes. It's in the future more than it is in the present. So I think that does relate to my process, and a lot of what I write about, and particularly when I mentioned this evolutionary psychology of things, is how difficult it is for people to really understand how creative that process is, and how science relies on creativity as much as probably any other specialty. But it's in a different service, or to a different service of the type of problem you're trying to solve. But in poetry, it's conceptual. You're just trying to imagine and put yourself in a space and seeing where that goes and how that feels.
I know that as your career and teaching career has progressed, you've told me that you've had a bit of a shift in your focus. And recently, you've been focused a lot on climate change and evolution education, particularly the challenges of dealing with denial. And we heard that a little bit in that second poem you read. I'm just curious to hear you talk about that. What motivated that change? How that change is manifested both in your teaching career and in your writing career.
Yeah, there's a few interesting trends that I've realized since I've been in the graduate program. One is I've been trying to write about climate change and eco-poetry for a long time, and I've never had much success in getting any of those pieces published. And I think partly because it is almost too scientific, right? It's too much language that comes from science and not as much about natural beauty and gratitude and things like that. And which is okay. I'm glad I'm discovering that. I'm currently trying to think a lot about what it would be an eco-poetics, which comes from kind of with that second poem that I read, comes from a course that I took that focused on Joan Retallack and that idea of indeterminacy. And she wrote about used constructivism as a metaphor, which is, since that's a background I have, That's why that's titled that. And it does respond to some of the things that she has written about. But then it also brings it into a more personal perspective as well, because it's the I in constructivism. So that's one of the things that, even though I am still trying to write about climate change, it's more about denial. It's more about what is the psychology of people who deny it, and not just climate change, but science in general. And it's difficult to bring this into poetry. It's not a space that a lot of poets are comfortable with, trying to reduce perhaps experiences down to phenomena. But I do think there's something here. I think there's something to mine out of our own psychology and how we respond to nature and to the challenges that we have with our impact on nature. And so that's kind of where things are going now, trying to really parse out the mechanisms of denial.
So what are the biggest ways that you've seen your poetry or process change since you've entered the MFA program?
Yeah, it started to become a lot more experimental. My first book was almost all lyrical. The second one did include a few more shaped poems and things that were a little more fragmentary, but everything I'm doing right now is very, I keep using the word fragmented, but it's because I want to superimpose 3 or 4 different things together, because that weaving is what gets to how we're thinking as human beings, how we're interacting with the world, and how that thinking impacts how we interact with the world. And then where's that going? What does that give us or lead us to? And a lot of times it's to a space where we are able to rationalize things in terms of our destructive forces, for instance, on the earth. The radical empathy is that if you're thinking about someone who's denying climate change and you hear them spout off something about a conspiracy of climate scientists who are trying to establish a global government and enslave everybody
Right.
in this odd concept, it's as real to them as anyone's identity is. But that identity has come from somewhere. It's developed throughout their lifetime. It's like anybody's identity has. You get to the level of identity, it's really, really hard to change that or to impact that in any way. So that was a real challenge in the classroom. And the solution isn't data, it isn't argument, it isn't confrontation. It's understanding where they're coming from and realizing that in the bottom line is we all kind of do want the same things. We want to live in harmony with our environment, with each other and so on. And these clashes of identity is kind of what gets in the way. But if you can reach out a little bit, find at least something in common, you can start building a relationship. It's not fast. It's a very long process. So, but it can happen.
I mean, what is writing for if not to reach out and make connections with people, right?
Exactly.
So you mentioned you have a PhD in biogeochemistry and a master's of education in curriculum and instruction. You've had these long careers as an ecologist, as an educator. What made you want to go back to school and get an MFA, and why now?
Well, I've always known that I was writing in a phone booth, and wasn't aware of everything that was going on. The most recent example is Christian Bach, who, when I was in graduate school, he was writing his crystallography, and he was writing about how DNA can store information and so on. And I kind of heard about DNA being used as a way to archive information. And so I would give assignments to my students where I'd say, write a haiku and then translate it into DNA code, give it to somebody else and see if they can get the same haiku back. Well, that was concurrent with the time that he was really impacting poetry, the type of poetry that I'm writing now. And I didn't discover that until last year, right? So sitting in the classroom last year and realizing, that connection, it just really brought home to me how ignorant I was of really the craft of poetry. And so I've always known that I wanted to find this. I've wanted to do an MFA. I don't think there's really a way to do it through teaching myself. It only took me so far. I accelerated it a little bit because I started teaching English. I taught science for 30 years, and it was getting a little bit tiresome, to be honest. I'm an environmental scientist, a biogeochemist. The genetics and the molecular biology that I was having to learn and keep up with as I taught biology it's just not what interests me. It's not why I got into science in the first place. So I kind of really jumped on the chance to teach English. I had a colleague who offered me that opportunity. And I said, yes, I'll take it. The, uh, the MFA program at SFSU offers a correlative in teaching. When I found that program and saw that I could take courses on teaching creative writing as part of the curriculum, I said, okay, now's a good time because I need that. I'm teaching English now and I don't have that pedagogy behind me. I want to learn how to teach English to any age, middle school, high school. And I've taught every age. I'm teaching middle school now. I've taught high school and college and even grad school or even preschool when I was at home with my kids. So
Yeah.
um, there's a lot of crossover I'm finding. Actually, it's all about constructive. It's still all about constructivism. It's about leading and guiding students to constructing knowledge on their own. You can't put it there, no matter how much you try. You have to teach them how to discover. And that's true in writing as well as in science.
Well, let's talk a bit more about the San Francisco State University's MFA in Creative Writing program. It's a 3-year program with, it appears, tracks in fiction, poetry, and playwriting. You mentioned that they offer classes in pedagogy and how to teach. Besides that, were there other things that drew you to this program in particular?
Well, proximity, obviously. I knew I would have to commute. I am surrounded by a lot of options, however. I mean, I could have chosen other things. I've known some colleagues at SFSU before, so I had a good feeling about it. Uh, I'm comfortable there. I knew that the culture there was one that I could fit into very well.
Well, tell us about that culture. What is it about the culture of SFSU that listeners might want to know about?
Sure. It's just extremely inclusive. I'm working on their literary journal right now as a course, 14 Hills. And just in the first few weeks of the course, we're just trying to really drive home how committed we are to representing different voices and different experiences and perspectives and so forth. I don't know whether to get into all of my history of supporting the LGBTQ community, but it's always been something that I kind of chose to focus on since I made friends in college as an undergraduate. And I've seen the struggles that they've had. So that is important to me, is to make people comfortable with diversity.
What's it been like working at 14 Hills? I personally think working for a literary journal is one of the best experiences that MFA students can have. How have you taken to that experience and how has that affected your poetry?
Yeah, we're just actually go tonight, and it's our third or fourth meeting. I don't know what. So I've read back journals, and we've talked about the mission of the magazine, and we've been reading entrance to one of the contests, which is interesting. It's long form poetry that is specifically addressed in this award with this award, and it's amazing. It's always interesting to hear or read other people's work, particularly in a contemporary setting, because you see process. You see what went into it. You can put yourself in the minds of the poet. So working on a literary journal is valuable. We're on the second semester. Most of the work that's going to be included in this issue was already accepted last year. So it's the awards that we're determining this semester. It's also the biggest class I've taken. There's 25 people in it. It's a very, very popular course. I've had some with 3 or 4 or 5 people, and this one's 25. So it's easier for me too, though. And then one thing as an introvert, to sit back and watch as much as taking part in it. I have a lot of background. I did manage a literary magazine when I was teaching college at the university, and so I kind of have my own thoughts on the process, and I like to sit back and watch how that develops in the rest of the class, and how each of the students in the class, again, it's a huge amount of diversity in the class. And everybody brings a perspective, and we're able to have conversations about these pieces that are really productive.
Well, my background is also in teaching, and
Mhm.
I think listening is an underrated skill when it comes to teaching, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I try to teach listening.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the culture at SFSU. I'm curious to hear what it's been like working with the faculty.
It's been amazing. There's a lot of pressure on the university right now, financially, and the department. And I know a lot of the students have been frustrated that there are less courses offered. There hadn't been a lot of new hiring for a while. So I think the department's a little smaller than it was in the past. But the people I've worked with have been fantastic, have been amazing. I've done a few directed studies, so I've been able to work one-on-one with a couple of the professors. I'm doing an independent study with one of them now. It's kind of where the ecopoetics focus is coming from. And so it's been everything I could hope for, right? It's been getting the validation of an actual poet looking at my work and seeing something worthwhile and willing to work with me on it. That's been, it's been amazing. And I respect them. I mean, every one of them has an amazing background in the field and in poetry, and a huge connection to the poetry community that I've been lacking for so long. And so I feel like I'm finally getting a step into that culture.
So I taught for many years before I went back to the MFA, and I remember being really thrilled to be a student again, to be on the other side and get to see
Yeah.
how other teachers approach their classes. How has that been for you? Has that been exciting to go back into the student role?
Um, yeah, it has been. I think in this case, and the courses that I've taken on teaching creative writing, it's been just of the same mind, right? Again, what was really comforting there, because the professor who teaches that, I respect her greatly. And we were of the same mind. I mean, it was really an easy course to kind of take because what I brought into it was kind of the same philosophy that I was being told to teach. And of course, I learned a lot, but it was interesting to see that maybe I was on the right track on a few things along the way. And then I can refine it and make it better. But yeah, the question about being a student again is an interesting one because I'm also still teaching. And so, yeah, I think about that all the time when I'm either thinking about, okay, how am I going to adapt this to what I'm teaching? What do I want to take? What do I want to steal essentially from other people? Things I want to try out in my own classroom. I think I'm a little bit beyond feeling like I'm a real student, in a sense, just because I have been for so much of my life. It's kind of my identity. Part of it is being a student, right? Being a lifelong learner. And so that part doesn't really feel that strange, but it is interesting to watch the other students this is their first graduate school experience. That's fun to watch, right? It's fun to kind of see where they are and how they're maturing from undergrads into graduate thinkers and how freeing that is. Remember when I first started graduate school thinking, wow, this is okay. Finally, we're finally starting to think about things. They're finally starting to ask us about our opinions and our thoughts, and not just a remember this kind of approach. And so seeing them take the shackles off, so to speak, and realizing that it's a very welcoming program, they can say and feel anything that comes to mind, and they're going to be accepted for that. That's a really nice process to watch.
So let's talk about the other students a little bit. According to the website, it appears that the school has both an MFA and an MA program that combined accepts 30 to 50 students per year. That sounds fairly big. How's it been working with other students? How's the sense of community in the program?
It's been interesting. I think the first course I took, or one of the first courses I took, was a workshop. So we passed our poetry around and read our poetry and listening to other poets read. And that was extremely valuable because, again, some of these other students are my children's age. Most of them, actually. I have to step back and realize just how much privilege I have, for one thing. Throughout my life, of course, I've lived with privilege my entire life and still do. And most of these other students have struggled, and they've been marginalized in different ways, and they're struggling with different emotional and philosophical issues. And I want to be there. I want to be present. And that's the main thing, is to be being present, hearing what they're saying, being able to reflect that so that they can feel comfortable. I always worry that my presence, and I'm a white man with gray hair, and but you couldn't symbolize any more privilege than that. So if I sit down in a classroom with these students who are 24 or 25, and they're looking at me and trying to think, well, what must he be like? Why is he here? One of the first things I want to do is make them comfortable that I'm there to listen, and that anything they say is I'm growing from that as well.
Were you nervous at all to return to the MFA program, to enter the MFA program as an older student?
No, not really. Not for me. My father taught, so I grew up on a campus, a couple campuses. It's just always been a natural place for me to be. And since I've been teaching most of my life, it's not been the university level most of that time, but it was enough of that time that it's just, again, it's identity. I fit on a college campus. I fit in a college classroom. It makes me comfortable to be there. It's one of the most comfortable places I can be right now, is in that classroom.
So one of the things that stood out to me when looking through the SFSU website is that the program seems to put an emphasis on community engagement. As part of the MFA, students can take a class called Community Projects and Literature, in which they gain experience in the literary community by partnering with local organizations. What can you tell us about that course and the program's overall connection to the greater literary community in San Francisco?
Well, that's a very complicated question because it's such a web of opportunities in San Francisco. And there are amazing poets who have written here for years and schools of poetry that have developed here. And many of those poets are still in the area. What that course is primarily getting at is to get down into the nitty-gritty of things. There are a lot of community programs that small presses, for instance, and they can go be part of that. Organizations that sponsor readings, City Lights brings in amazing events throughout the year. And I know as part of class, sometimes I tend to take evening classes, and a few times the Poetry Center has brought those programs into the college campus. So they're in the classroom, and then we go from the classroom back out into the community and experience some of these interesting places. I don't live in San Francisco myself. I'm about 20 miles south in San Mateo, or at least the San Mateo area. So commuting up and down is a little bit disappointing because I miss a lot of these opportunities that I see in the student Discord and the events that are constantly going on. But it has been really, again, some of the luminaries in poetry that have visited the campus and then come into the Poetry Center at SFSU. That's been a great opportunity to see poetry at that level.
Yeah. No, San Francisco is a wonderful literary city. So what do you think listeners should know about living and studying in the Bay Area?
Well, I think it really exemplifies the whole idea that a city can magnify creativity and thinking. That simply by putting yourself into an environment where there is a lot of this free thinking and creativity, it ratchets everything up. And that's one of the things cities are good at. I don't think there are many cities that can rival San Francisco in that respect. I mean, the whole atmosphere of the place is be creative, let yourself be free and think and feel. So that part of it, I think, is very nurturing for students who come into the program. Now, obviously, it's financially difficult to live in the area. Tuition is about as low as it gets in California. It's one of the lower tuitions, but that doesn't mean it's not a big burden for students. I'm constantly getting emails that offer scholarship opportunities, and the department really does a good job of trying to connect students to scholarships and other sources of income. I think there's a lot of support in San Francisco, obviously. I think there's, again, culturally, I can't think of many other places that would nurture some of the diversity that we have in the program in the same way that SFSU does. Now that, like I said, I'm in San Mateo, a little bit farther south, but even, the larger area, Oakland and San Mateo and down to San Jose, right? It's the entire peninsula is very open. Lots of programs in the libraries where there are poetry readings that are all connected. And there's poetry readings, like I said, throughout that area. There's a lot of solid programs and presses in San Jose as well as San Francisco and Oakland and a lot of the students. And we go over to Oakland sometimes and see events there, right, at Berkeley or some other program that's in Oakland. And so it's really interesting to see not just the smaller downtown isolated kind of culture, but how that actually radiates out into a much broader area. So students can come from anywhere in that area, and I think it's very comforting. I wouldn't discourage anybody from coming here from anywhere in the U.S. If they're looking for the kind of program that we're describing here with the diversity that we have and the cradle of creativity that San Francisco offers.
No doubt. It is a very creative city and a very open city. It's a place I love to travel to.
Oh, good.
But as you mentioned, the cost of living is very high in the Bay, and it does not appear that the San Francisco State program is a fully funded program. But according to the website, there are some scholarships and assistantships available. So I suppose that's something that we should encourage listeners just to reach out to the program and ask them what's available.
Definitely. And I know a lot of the students have, they have to call them PAs now instead of TAs because of some union issues. They're not paid as well as they should be because of that. But they do often get into that program where they get to teach the undergraduate creative writing courses and get money for that, right? Get paid for that. So that's a big part of the income stream for a few of the students that I've known pretty well or gotten to know pretty well.
Well, speaking of teaching, you mentioned this earlier. You're still teaching middle school English while in the MFA, which I imagine is a large workload to try to balance. I'm curious if you have any advice for listeners who may be considering this path and how you balance these two.
There are a few other students that I think are working full time, but not very many. And I'm able to do it because I've been doing it for so long, right? I don't need to write down lesson plans or a curriculum. I do over the summer so parents can see what I'm going to do. But in terms of day to day, I can step in and I know what I want to do and know how to do it. I couldn't have done this load probably any other time than at this stage in my life, where the teaching is truly just practice to the point where it's easy. I don't say it's too easy. It still takes a lot of grading. Teaching English is a lot of grading. To do it right, too, because I want to focus everything through writing. So I want to encourage these kids to write and give them feedback and go through that revision process with them, which I think is missing in most or a lot of English programs, is taking the time to revise and realizing the value of feedback. So that part of it, though, is, again, it's been synergistic in a sense that things that I've learned on campus, things I'm still learning on campus, even though I'm not in those, quote, education courses anymore, I bring them into my classroom all the time. It's fresh ideas. So that keeps me fresh. It keeps, like I said, I don't want to be rote in my teaching. And I don't think I ever teach anything the same way twice. But I'm comfortable with that approach. My skill set is such that I can do that. And I can pivot and I can respond to things that I'm seeing in the classroom that would be valuable for the students. It is hard. I probably will take a little bit longer than the 3 years, probably 3.5. And that's with taking some courses over the summer. We are allowed to take some upper level undergraduate courses over the summer and count some of those 12 hours worth of those courses. So using that summer for that 12 hours and then an extra semester will get me through it, because I'm generally taking 6 hours. I try to take at least one course on campus. Right now it's 14 Hills, but the workshop I mentioned, a couple other really valuable courses that I've taken on campus. Those experiences, I think, actually help make it work, because that puts my mind in that space, which is a creative space. It's not in the teaching space anymore. Because there's danger there, especially as a poet. You don't want to be teaching with your poetry or trying to, because that's what poetry is for. So being able to take my mind from one place, physically from one place to another, it's not absolutely necessary, but it really helps. Even when I leave campus and come back, I bring that with me. I bring those ideas with me and can go in and out of that space a little bit more easily than if I wasn't on campus, at least for some of the time.
Well, before we wrap up, I've got one last question for you. What is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's definitely meeting my expectations. Like I said, I can see now where my work might fit in the larger description of poetry and the directions that things are going and have come from. Knowing the history of of poetry a lot better, and some of the more significant poets that I missed out on for the last 30 years because I was working and focusing on a different career. That part has been really, really what I was hoping for. Again, getting myself in there. This right is this opportunity to be on this podcast would not have come out any other way, and it's really valuable for me to take advantage of this. It's one reason why I applied, because it makes me feel like, okay, I really am part of this community. I'm not just an interloper or on the sidelines. I mean, I'm in it, and that feeling is what I was looking for, being included in the poetry community. I've been involved in, Houston when I lived there with the Houston Poetry Fest and, many local programs. And here's the California Writers Club. Those are still a little bit detached from, I think, what the larger poetry community can be. And so I'm glad to have expanded my presence into allow all these different spaces. It's just really valuable to go back to the local poetry readings every Saturday morning or, things like that. So I won't stop doing that. But I feel more a part of it now, feel more a part of being a poet, kind of a real poet. It's kind of like, this is what has finally given me some confirmation that what I'm doing is real. It's really poetry, and it's valuable.
Well, I know that I'm very happy that you're now a part of the MFA writers community. Thank you so much for taking the time to stop by and chat with me. It's been really lovely getting to know you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been my pleasure.